And Monica is founder of Eyes on the Horizon, which to me is a really, really neat company because Monica does something I really believe in, which is going to communities, farming communities, rural communities, talking about mental health. And she's going to help me tonight get a better idea of exactly what she does. But I love this because there are so many underserved communities. And I think, unfortunately, in mental health, and tell me if I'm wrong, Monica, we kind of pick and choose the important people. We kind of pick and choose, well, these are the people we have to serve and go after. And there are so many populations that just don't get any of the mental health airtime. So I'm so glad to have you here tonight.
Great.
I want to start with something just kind of fun and simple, which is, Monica, where did you grow up?
I grew up on a farm right outside of Bijou, Minnesota. Bijou is Anishinaabe for good morning. And there's a whole lot. My grandpa used to say it like Bijou, and then there was a lot more to it. But yes, right outside of Bijou, Minnesota in Monoman County.
I'm pretty sure I've driven past that on my way to Monoman.
Probably.
And I think I always pronounced it Bijou, so that was not correct.
You know, some people say Bijou. Those of us who are from there say Bijou.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'll know that I'm not too far off then. So, Monica, I want to ask you about your company, Eyes on the Horizon. How did this dream come to fruition? How did you start it, and what was kind of your vision in making this happen?
Wow, it was a journey for sure, and I could not have planned it. As miraculous as it feels for me to be doing this work, you know, it came from a series of doors opening and doors closing and networking and meeting people, and they're all part of my journey. But what really had the direct lead into the company was in around 2016, I suppose. There had been a pretty significant downturn in the egg economy. Okay. So farmers and ranchers were struggling. The number of farmer and ranch related deaths by suicide were on the increase. And I was sought out just by chance by a local, it's a Red River Farm Network out of Grand Forks, North Dakota. And they wanted to do an initiative around mental health for the farming community. At the time, I was Director of Business Development at Prairie St. John's in Fargo. And so that kind of started the journey. I did some things for them. I was asked to do a little bit more speaking and training. I met people, I networked. So I started my business just on the side. Wow. And so I was really kind of working 2 full-time jobs. And then I secured a contract through the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, the Farm Business Management Program. And that really allowed me to go into business for myself full-time. And from there, it's just been a journey. The opportunities keep coming. So that's my primary contract. So in the state of Minnesota, I work with farmers and farm families, providing support and counseling. And then apart from that, I do quite a bit of speaking and training, really in rural areas, a lot around mental wellness, building resilience, getting through difficult times, things like that. Kind of my overarching goal or mission statement, I guess, for my business is to reduce the stigma and barriers often attached to mental health services in rural areas. And so whatever contracts I take or whatever jobs I do, I try to make sure that I'm being true to that mission.
So growing up in a farming community, this is near and dear to your heart.
Very, very. I mean, I remember as a teenager growing up and Dad really struggling with anxiety, and, you know, the tension was there. He was unable to sleep. And, you know, as a kid, you just want to make everything okay so your parents are happy and there's not stress in the household. And,
right.
And it's, I would say all 3 of us on some level have anxiety from those days because we couldn't fix it. And Dad couldn't fix it. Nobody could fix it because of all the uncontrollables. But what he did that I really greatly respect is back in the 80s, when there was such a stigma, he sought out counseling.
Wow.
From a counselor that was at the time funded for farmers and kind of housed in the county courthouse 1 day a week kind of a deal. And he sought out counseling to get help for his anxiety.
I think that's really admirable, because you don't see a lot of men even today seeking mental health services out. So your dad was kind of a trailblazer.
Yeah.
So
yes. And I will add that the only reason he did is because he talked to someone who said they were going. So I think we need to keep that in mind too, that our own stories and our own vulnerability really can lead to some great things happening.
I agree. And we're going to tie that into leadership a little bit later, but I'm so glad that you brought that up. I want to ask about farm stress, because Monica, I went to your website. It's beautiful, by the way. I think it's designed very well. I'd never heard the word farm stress or the term farm stress. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to that? What is farm stress?
Yeah. Yep. And sometimes I like to clarify it and just say emotional stress on the farm, because my gosh, farm stress, that's everything from,
right,
workload to finances. So I think what makes farming, a few things make farming such a unique occupation and a hotbed for stress are the number of uncontrollables that literally can determine the success or failure of your business.
Okay.
So uncontrollables like commodity prices, weather, regulations, wars in countries you've never been to, the global demand, all of that impacts what you get for that bushel of whatever you're growing, or that animal that you're growing for consumption, or the dairy cow that's being milked. And you have absolutely no control over how much you get paid for. I mean, you can market, you can do your things, and you can increase efficiency in production, but ultimately you don't set your price.
Right.
And you also don't set your price on the inputs that go into making that happen. So, many of our dairy producers especially, it's like, gosh, if we could just break even, we'd be happy. So then that's one part of it, all the uncontrollables. You don't have PTO, you don't have, you're sick, you work because there's nobody else there.
Right.
It's a high injury profession, high death profession caused by accidents and injuries for adults and kiddos. So you have that trauma piece. A natural disaster comes through. It could really devastate you for that whole year. And then how do you account for that? But at the basis of farm stress, at the very foundation, is that sense of legacy that is so often attached to the farm. And you'll hear people talk about, I'm a 5th generation farmer, I'm a 4th generation farmer. It's like, what does that mean? Well, what that means is that's how many generations have lived and worked and built a business on that land.
Wow.
And so the thought of you being the generation that fails and has to let it go, has to sell, whatever. It's like you have the weight of all of your ancestors on your shoulders. And that is strong. There's actually a name for it that Dr. Michael Roseman, a psychologist in Iowa, coined, and it's called the agrarian imperative. And it's really that what drives a farmer to hold on to the land at all costs, despite relationship damage, health damage, financial damage. I mean, it's like that they cannot lose the farm. And that also ties into why we see deaths by suicide higher in farm and ranch occupations than in the general public.
I feel like I'm getting educated tonight. And when you talk about the pressure, it makes me think about like kids who go to these universities, these high-ranking universities, and the next kid's supposed to go. It's that same kind of weight. You need to perform academically, because if you don't, you're the failure. You're going to let the family down. And I'm hearing something very similar here. It's this the pressure.
Good comparison. Yeah.
But yeah, that's exactly what I think of. It's this: you cannot fail, and so there may be nothing good for you at the end of it, but you have a legacy to uphold. And earlier when you mentioned suicide, it didn't even resonate, but that makes so much sense to me now. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. Because what a tragic, absolutely. But what a tragedy to have to lose your life by way of trying to uphold something.
Yes. Yes, and just foregoing your quality of life because you're under this, this perceived demand that, it runs deep.
So, Monica, when you go and speak on this topic to people, are they naive like me sometimes? Like, well, I didn't know that. I didn't know these things happened in a rural area or a farm. I mean, is it sort of similar, or am I the only one?
No, very similar. And one of the groups that I speak regularly to are health professionals and behavioral health professionals that work in rural areas, because it's almost like its own cultural competency, the world of agriculture.
Yeah.
And so that it's nothing that we would normally know. How would you know? You wouldn't unless you learned or studied or were exposed. So no, you're not the only one. It's very common, and people have farm clients all the time. And it's kind of like light bulb moments go off after we talk. It's like, oh, that explains why, I couldn't get them to whatever, or they wouldn't agree to take a break or take a vacation or, what have you.
Gotcha. Well, I'm glad that I'm not alone in this, because I was a little worried there for a second, because I think part of it, it's not real flashy. I mean, so much of mental health these days is trauma. You hear this. And it's trauma, I think, specific to just certain people. And I think you made a great point here that trauma is on the farm too, but I don't hear that in the media. I don't hear that in the commercials. I don't hear that perpetuated anywhere. Right. But it seems to me to be pretty darn important. So I really appreciate it.
And the lifestyle kind of causes that. Yeah, no problem.
So I think you're a good leader. I'll just cut to it. And when I invited you on the show, I said you were a good leader. And Monica, we hadn't spoken in many years. But as I'm putting together this episode of leadership, I thought, who in my past has really spoke to me? And I remember, because I came to you a lot with some issues, and I probably talked your ear off to the point of insanity, and I apologize 10 years later. But I don't know that you ever solved anything directly. But you listened. And I'll never forget, every time we talked, I left feeling heard. And then I didn't care if you solved the problem. I just cared that you listened to me. And as I reflect back, I start thinking how many people I've talked to in higher positions of authority that I never felt really heard me. It's either I can't solve the problem, that's the end of it, or maybe I don't care about the problem. You always cared about the problem. I want to know where that comes from with you.
Oh gosh, that's a tough question. Where does that come from? I think people deserve to be heard, and heard in a sense of not to hear you to give a response that I think will make you happy or, quell the tension or what have you. I think people deserve to be heard, to be understood. And often leaders get into these roles of that we've got demands to meet, we've got benchmarks, we've got financial goals. That is what drives the leadership. The people and caring about the people don't drive the leadership. And from my early days, my first professional job out of grad school 25 years ago was in a school. It was a school-based mental health position. And I learned immediately that the people that had the best picture of the functioning of the school was the secretary, the janitor, and the lunch ladies.
Wow.
But would anybody ask or listen to their opinions? Not typically. But because of the position they were in of hearing and seeing, they knew. I mean, they knew what was going on. They knew what was healthy. They knew what was unhealthy. And we don't often listen to people in positions that are doing the work. We listen to the people in administrative and supervisory positions. I mean, I honestly think the same thing about the government. It's like we need to listen to people. They are not living normal lives like we do.
Absolutely.
And it trickles down to all leadership. It's like if you're a leader of people, then represent your people.
I'm not agreeing with you because I like you. I'm agreeing because I think that is so true, because every support staff I've ever had, up to and including before I went to my own private practice, they're a wealth of knowledge. I actually went to one of them, Monica, to teach me how to do the billing, because they could explain it in a way that even the billing people couldn't do. I'm like, man, I'm so grateful for this. But do they ever get the credit for that? No. Which is horrible, because that does mean we really do look at titles as defining people, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
We do. And we pay based on that, and we value based on that, and award based on that. And it's, I love organizations that don't draw those lines. Like whether you are a support staff, you're the clinical director, you're the CEO, no matter who you are, we are all together in this and working towards the same goal. And it doesn't matter if, you have a master's degree or a doctorate or you barely got through high school. It doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
We're in it together.
It's equality. So I want to get your thoughts on this. I'm going to try to not be too controversial tonight, but I usually say something controversial because that's just Eric Nance, obviously. But the problem I see with a lot of leaders or people in leadership positions, I have two thoughts. Number one, many of them come across to me like they have nothing left to learn. Okay, that they're informed enough. Okay, and the other thing too is, and Brene Brown, talks about this a lot, is the lack of vulnerability. Looking like you don't know what you're doing, but it's okay. I see this missing in leaders, and it's like the older I've gotten, the more I'm able to spot it really quickly. And I'll look at people and I'll think, you're trying to fake your way through this. You don't know what you're talking about. Because I think if you do know what you're talking about, it becomes pretty self-evident. But I see people working so hard. So what are your thoughts on that, Monica?
I think there's incredible, I think there's incredible pressure on leaders to fake it if they need to, because we all want them to know, and we all want them to, as a society, we want our leaders to be competent, and we want to trust them and believe they've got it all together. So with that kind of pressure, often self-induced, a leader does put a wall up around being vulnerable, or around admitting fault, or around showing their weaknesses per se, which then also leads into what you were saying about the whole training aspect, or I know it all, there's nothing more I need to learn. And gosh, that's just setting an organization up for failure.
Right.
Because it needs to be dynamic. An organization needs to stay dynamic to attract people, to retain people, to stay competitive. And to be dynamic, your leadership needs to be dynamic and hear and learn and put yourself out there.
Absolutely.
I mean, when I was your supervisor, a lot of the times I didn't know what the heck I was doing. Did not know what the heck I was doing. But I knew I could listen to my people, and I knew the goals of the company. And it's kind of like, how can we make those two work together,
Right.
so that we can experience some success here. Success looks different to different people, but
It does. I never told you how happy I was when you would make an appearance at the Apple. Like, Monica's here. You know what? I'm going to feel good today because I'm going to get listened to. So that's the impression that you made. And I also know that you would have no problem saying, I don't know. You would have no problem saying that. I just know this about you.
Yeah.
So Monica, here's the big question too. Where are all the leaders? Where have they gone?
Yep.
Where are they hiding? Are they under rocks? Are they in different states? Where are they?
I think you really hit on an important piece when you talked about the vulnerability thing, that there's immense pressure on leaders to not be vulnerable, and so they're kind of then put on this pedestal. And then if something does go wrong, we dethrone them very quickly. Right. And fingers are pointed with social media. It's like this thing. So there is a lot to be said about a very humble leader. And I read a book when I was with the agency we were with, and it was Good to Great by Jim Collins.
Yes, never read it, but I've heard of it.
In that book, he describes a level 5 leader. So I was like, okay, what is a level 5 leader? And part of being a level 5 leader, he talks about the window and the mirror phenomenon. I don't know what you want to call it.
Okay.
So in essence, when things are not going well in an organization, you as the leader are looking in the mirror. Because you are the one in that position, and it kind of falls on you to take that. It's not going well. I'm going to take that and look at the organization, but I'm not going to blame. I'm not going to finger point. I'm taking that. I'm taking responsibility for that. On the flip side, if there's success in an organization, it's like looking through a window and giving credit to all of the people that made it happen, no matter their position, because it's about them. It's about them. It is not about you as the leader. And so I think that was a very simple visual for me when I was moving into those leadership roles. It's like, I am going to be quick to accept responsibility, and I'm going to be quick to give credit. Because I think that strengthens teams. I think that makes people want to work for you. I think it gives people a voice. And another thing that was important is when things weren't going right, it was getting people's thoughts and feelings and impressions and suggestions to turn it around. It was definitely not, I'm going to do what I think needs to be done without consulting my people. And my people being those who are actually doing the work.
Absolutely.
So that was a great inspiration for me. And your question about where are the leaders in the mental health field, we have a tendency to see someone as, they're a really good therapist, their billing is down, or they got their billing down. I mean, not their billing is down, but they got their billing down. They know they have their hours. You were just a very efficient therapist that way. Never had to worry about Eric.
Yeah.
But we see these therapists, social workers, whoever, doing really awesome work. And so we think we're going to promote them because they're good at what they're doing. And oftentimes we just set that person up for failure because they're good at what they're doing. So maybe that's where their passion is. Maybe that's where they want to stay. But we kind of put these carrots out in front of them like, hey, we're going to bump you up to whatever. And sometimes their skills don't lie in that type of leadership, and we set them up for failure. And so I think we have to be, and I'm saying this as a therapist who went into leadership roles.
Right.
But that's probably why I didn't also act like a typical leader. So we just have to be careful with that. I see it happen all the time in behavioral health.
So one of my favorite presenters, his name is George Harmon, and he does really good trainings on supervision and the pitfalls, and gets into all the legalities. And one thing he said over again, he goes, just because you're a good clinician does not mean you're going to be a good supervisor. He says, most supervisors start like this. Somebody slips a piece of paper under your door, says, can you please start supervising? There's no training for this. You just kind of get launched into it. And I guess for me, Monica, I've always loved teaching. I love teaching people. So for me, it's never easy to supervise. But when you love teaching people, it just makes it all worth it. And
natural fit.
Absolutely. But I do know people that are in supervisory roles. They have no business being there. They just, and maybe it's not so much about their bad leaders. I tend to go there in my brain. But maybe that's just not their fit.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. We have,
it's outside of their skill set.
Absolutely. Yeah. And how often have you and I watched people outside of their skill sets be granted responsibilities that they really shouldn't be given?
Yes.
And I've come to realize in our field, and it's really important for the young people too, you don't even have to be good in this field to make it. You don't. You just have to be merely good enough. That's what I see. And I don't like that. I think our standards should be higher.
Right.
But yeah.
There's shortage. Especially when we get into rural areas, it's like we need people in this field, and I think we're quick to recruit, and then we don't often put time and energy into training.
Right.
And so we kind of get these people out of school that are fresh and. Yeah.
I look at it kind of like we have a leak in the boat, and who's going to fill the leak, and we'll put whoever's next in line. So yeah.
Yes.
And that's not a very good thing to say about our field, Monica, but I've been around long enough to see it, and I don't know if that's going to improve or not. But certainly I know it affects how we train people. You know, one thing I've seen happen too is younger clinicians come in and they get delegated these cases they aren't ready to handle either. And that's all driven from your supervisors and the people on top. I've seen that happen 1,000 times. I mean, you have no business treating a borderline personality individual if this is your first year out of grad school. You have no business doing that. But it happens.
Yes.
But it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It happens a lot. It happens a lot. And then there's the larger complaints that come out about inadequate behavioral health care.
Yes.
That we're kind of triaging people, but we're not having them do the work they need to do to actually get better.
Absolutely. And I don't want the conversation to get negative, Monica. I think this is the reality. I think this is what we work in. And that's why I call it the dark side of therapy, because this is the dark side. It's not always pretty. You know, you watch a commercial for Adderall, or when somebody's riding through a field, everything's great. But that's only one part of mental health. Okay, there's a lot of it that is dark, and a lot of it that doesn't look so attractive.
It is.
And I would say too, so,
and that's not talked about in our training programs.
No,
you know, we don't prep our kids for it.
I actually asked one of my supervisees, I said, so how much training do you get in grad school for what you're going to be up against? They said none. And I had no idea. And I went on my high horse and said, why aren't professors doing this? And one of my supervisees looked at me, she goes, Eric, if they told us what we were getting into, none of us would get into the field.
That may be true. So just to cause some light to the dark side, I would really encourage, that I felt like, and I don't know about you, but when I was starting my practice, I felt like there's going to be something more I'm going to do in my career. I won't always just do direct service.
Right.
And, like you with the podcast and supervision, there was like something more. And so I really encourage those young therapists that just know there's something more out there. I know I have skills. I have dreams. Pursue self-improvement, pursue leadership courses, pursue outside of counseling, more like business, because that is going to open up opportunities for you that, that don't always exist especially in our field.
I agree. And I'll say this too, Monica. I don't know if that's encouraged though. And I think we should. I think we should be encouraging it, because you're right. Dreams die. Part of the reason I got into the private practice and I'm doing the podcast is because I realized I watch a lot of people in the field, and that this is all they're going to do. I think, and to get really soapboxy, I look at people. I say, "Man, you're so talented. You could do so much more." That's not their dream. I mean, that's my dream. I have to be very cognizant of that. But like you, yeah. And this format is great because we can reach people this way, and just like you're doing with your company, we're hitting the newer clinician, which that's something we don't talk about either. I feel like that is so neglected, and maybe for the reasons we talked about. If they knew what they were getting into, maybe they wouldn't get in the field. But I think, Monica, and you do presentations on self-care. I want to get your thoughts on this too. If we teach people how to do good self-care, I think a lot of them can get to the field just fine. But I don't think that's an emphasis either, taking care of the self.
No. I actually just did a training today for a group of behavioral health folks on burnout and self-care.
Awesome.
And one of the analogies that we talked about was when you're hitting times of stress, caseload, overload, high needs, high impact clients, trauma, all of the stuff, and your billing goals and all of this, not to mention everything in your personal life. So what typically happens is you have a first order of change, and that first order of change is I'm going to work harder, I'm going to stay up later, I'm going to get up earlier, I'm going to be more efficient, I'm going to da-da-da-da. We know that only lasts for so long.
Right.
Just like if you're driving a car and you're going up a steep hill or you're in mud and you can rev that engine, but it's not good for that engine. You might limp along, but eventually it's not going to go.
Right.
And so then it's like, okay, how do we downshift in our lives? And what does that downshift look like? And that's the second order change. Knowing that you cannot maintain that first order change of putting in hours and pushing it. So what is your lower gear?
Wow.
Is it a change in the type of work you do? Is it a 4-day work week? Is it getting yourself a therapist to deal with issues that are maybe triggering to you? It's like, it's bigger than I'm taking a half a day to do some health self-care, or I'm going to get a massage, or going on a girls' weekend for self-care. That is not what it's about. It is about what is your lower gear that is solid, intentional life change for you to cope.
I like the language. Because I think, we stay in high gear a lot, don't we?
A lot.
Yeah.
Burnout, which leads to burnout.
Yeah, absolutely.
And no time for training. Yeah.
So if you have a newer clinician, Monica, sitting with you, what's the first piece of advice you'd give them?
I think it would be exactly what you're talking about. It's like, how do you take care of yourself when you're going to be faced with a lot of emotional and cognitive demands from clients? And you are bringing all of that stuff with you, who you are emotionally, your past, your psychological struggles. And so how are you going to take care of yourself on those, actually 4 levels? I'll say 4 levels. How are you going to take care of yourself physically, socially, psychologically, and spiritually when you are faced with vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue? Let's nail down some intentional strategies right now. And they will change as that clinician changes, but I think ongoing training has got to be one of those, like the psychological protective factor. There needs to be a feeling of competence that I think a lot of our new therapists do not have. They don't feel competent to take on like the really severe mental health issues that clients bring to them.
Would it be fair to say, too, that they get into the field and they don't know how big it is, how much bigger than them it is, what they're going to have to put into it, that it kind of comes like a holy, cow kind of moment. I didn't know it was going to be like this.
Mm-hmm.
So here's my...
And I think from a very practical... Nope, go ahead.
I was going to say, so here's my challenge to you, Monica. I had a supervisee the other day, because I'm talking about self-care darn near every time we meet as a group, and finally one of them says to me, Eric, I don't want to do anything else. If you give me a self-care assignment, that's one more thing I have to put on my schedule. And I'm trying to be a good leader. I'm trying to... What do I say to that supervisee, Monica?
I would say that self-care is something we're going to work on weaving into your everyday life. So it's not a standalone exercise. It's not a scheduled thing, although you could schedule it, and if that works, great, but our schedules are overloaded. It is more about, you know what, I'm just going to pause and pay attention to my 5 senses before the next client comes in the door. I am going to go for a little walk and reset my mind between clients. I am going to notice things that bring me joy. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to feed my soul. And just by virtue of feeding my soul, I am taking care of myself. Now, what does that look like? For some people, feeding their soul is being with a good social support group. For some, it's going fishing. For some, it's walking in the woods. For some, it's listening to music. It's like, what feeds your soul? And how do you implement that into your everyday life without making it like this standalone, okay, I'm going to go do self-care now? Because in our busy schedules, that will go by the wayside. That will be gone.
Well, that's probably why I'm failing at this, Monica. That's why my supervisees don't want to do it, because I set it up like that. So.
Well, I think the activities you're forcing them to do bring awareness and intentionality.
That's
true. The beauty of like it being a part of supervision. That there, it's gotta become like conscious.
I think you're right in that it needs to be woven in, and so I'm going to borrow that idea from you, because it's like everything else. It becomes a habit the more we do it. But I think you're right. A lot of times I look at it as one thing you have to. Nobody wants to be told what to do. I figured that out too. But at the same time, sitting with people who are crying, it's tough, and I probably do go into a rescue mode to some extent. Let's fix this right now. We can do this. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not going to work. Mm-hmm. And you're exactly right. I think as a therapist, I go into my solution-focused approach, and but yeah, that is telling somebody what to do.
I hear you.
Yeah, I think we've all been there. But weaving it in, and I agree, because I have, in my office, I'm pretty nerdy. I've got my action figures and my collectibles, and just glancing at those between sessions, and I'll even, like I have my Gene Simmons, I'll hold them up to clients sometimes. Even that is a very fun way to get away from the stress, and inviting your client to do it too.
It brings joy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So on that note, can good leaders laugh and poke fun at themselves?
Absolutely, they should. It's probably not a good thing if they can't.
Yeah.
I think to become real to your people is huge. It's like I am a normal person. I'm a mom that has kids that have issues. I have a partner and we have our relationship issues. I do stupid things and laugh at myself and just to share that vulnerability. This morning I went to the bank and I dropped the little container out of the little vacuum thing.
Yes.
I had to like shimmy out of my vehicle, crawl underneath, get the container, shimmy back into my, it's like dumb example, but telling something like that is like, they're everyday normal human people.
Yeah, right.
And it shouldn't be a big deal to be like, oh my gosh, Monica's spending time with me. That should be like, yeah, why wouldn't I?
Thanks for sharing that, because I've
True story, by the way.
Well, no, it's a very visual story, and I can picture that cylinder rolling away. With my luck, it'd probably leave the bank, and I'd have to chase right after it. Here's my worry, and I want to spend just a few minutes with this. The world has changed with technology. Okay, it's a very me-focused society, and with the newer clinicians, my biggest concern is that vulnerability is so frowned upon. Yep. And I just wonder, what is that breakthrough going to look like where we can get the younger generation? It's hard for our generation to be vulnerable. How are we going to get the newer generation who are so fixated on this fast pace of life, a fast way to live, because everything comes at us so quickly now. I don't think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
What are we going to do for this generation as leaders? What are we going to do, Monica, to get them on board with the vulnerability that they need?
Oh, it's so interesting you say that, because you look at the social media posts and we like to portray ourselves as these perfect people that have it all together. I honestly think it's going to happen when we as leaders model vulnerability. Yeah. As we show that we can be vulnerable, we can make mistakes, we can seek input, we are normal human beings. It's just that we're in a position of being really focused on the mission of our organization and agency, but we can still be vulnerable. We can still be real people. We can admit failure without, fear of reprisal. Although in some organizations, you would have consequences for admitting fault or failure or weakness.
You're right.
And so again, we need to set it up so that we are creating an atmosphere that we offer grace and we are forgiving as leaders, and then the hope being that it's reciprocated because we've created the culture.
It's getting pretty cerebral now, so now I'm going to have to use some more higher powered neurons here. But yeah, I know it gets scary for my clients too at this point. But here's why I like vulnerability, because it's truthful. It's the truth. It's the absolute truth. Mm-hmm. And I guess I get to a point where I realize that the truth's a pretty good thing, even if it's ugly to other people. And I do know agencies where that is not revered, that vulnerability. But to me, the heartbreaking thing, Monica, is that how do you connect to people then? I mean, don't we connect through our vulnerabilities and through our humanity? Yeah. And the quickest way to do that, I think, is through vulnerability. Now the counter-argument, because I'm always aware of the counter-argument somebody would make against me, is, well, that violates the one-down approach with your supervisor and supervisee. Okay? Somebody out there is thinking that right now. It's supposed to be that way. And I couldn't disagree more. Because every bit of success I've had with supervision has come through me saying to people things like, it's okay, you made it. One of the biggest mistakes I made at North Homes, Monica, I had an auditor come through and didn't like my treatment plans. Remember those days? Mm-hmm. And Bill Faber and I, we wrote like 3 letters saying, look, this is a person with BPD. It's hard to measure the goals. And we got fined like $1,300. I was devastated. Yeah. And Bill kind of said,
I bet you were.
I
bet you were.
I didn't want to lose the company money. But I tell that story usually when supervisors say, well, they're going to fire me for not making my quota. No, they're not. I have cost us way more than you have. but I
yes.
So yeah, I have no shame in telling the story because it happened. Mm-hmm. And again, I think that's what it...
Well, and I think if there's a...
Go ahead, please.
Oh, go ahead.
No, there's a slight delay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just going to say...
No, you're out.
We have a little delay. I think that there's a fine line between when someone makes a mistake, do we want to, as a leader, view it from a disciplinary standpoint? And there are some mistakes that, yes, they need to be looked at as a disciplinary standpoint. There needs to be some kind of whatever action plan, warning, verbal warning, whatever.
Right.
Okay. But I firmly believe that should be the rare occasion that when things happen, it's a training and teachable moment. I used to tell my kids all the time, similar to what you just said, if they broke a dish, say, like, Mom, I broke this glass, whatever. And I said, you know what, you guys, I have broken more things than you will ever break. So don't worry about it. We are totally fine.
Right.
And that's the same mentality I brought to my people. It's like, I have made so many mistakes. Let's look at the situation. What can we learn from it? What do we need to do differently? Like, I'm guessing your treatment plans. And we will move forward doing the best we can. But to not have that valuable process of talking through and learning and affirming, where are the relationships? And talk about putting an employee, somebody you supervise, in a prime position for burnout and stress. Like they feel like they can't do anything right. So we're not helping when we take that disciplined consequencing kind of standpoint. Now, are there times where that's necessary? Absolutely. And I've had those times, and I've fired my share of people. But I think for the most part, that's very rare and should be very rare.
I agree, and I think there's a huge difference between making a mistake in your billing, forgetting to do something, versus fraudulently billing or fraudulently,
Yes.
or lying to your client. I had a situation with that one time where a fellow colleague lied about falling asleep in front of a client, and that, you don't do that. But that's sort of a proactive kind of deceptive behavior versus making a mistake. And I think for newer clinicians, they're going to make mistakes. Because think about this. Yeah. So often they work for the insurance company. They don't work for the client. That's just the way it is. And I hate to say that, but it is true.
It's reality.
It is reality. And you think you're going to satisfy them all the time? You're not. And so I often say, I said this to one of my favorite supervisees. I said, are you being helpful to your clients? That's all I had to say. She goes, yes. I said, I don't want to talk about billing today. And that was the end of that conversation. Yeah.
I think that's an important reality that, and that ties into the work we do, is the outside pressures that aren't necessarily realistic or helpful. And insurance companies are often one of those.
There is, and it's very American of us. We do strive for perfection, and I hear that a lot too amongst the social circles I traverse. And mental health is a field that has no room for perfection. It cannot be done, I think. No. And I don't think we should strive for that. I think we should strive to be excellent and excellent leaders. But let's leave perfection alone. Let's leave that for the birds, because we're never going to get there.
Right. It really
Monica,
is.
I want to say thank you so much. It has been an absolute honor to have you here tonight, and I'd like to do it again. You have, again, a way of commanding the conversation, which I love, because you're saying stuff worth listening to, and I knew that was going to happen tonight. But I like that we see things similarly, and that, again, I'm not siloed by myself here, that my definition of leadership is not too far off from yours. And having worked with a lot of people, I mean, we've both been in the field 25 years. We do know some stuff. And I just absolutely love your approach and wish you continued success in what you're doing, because you are helping so many people, Monica. And I think it's just awesome.
Well, thanks so much, Eric. I was very excited to hear from you and very proud of you for the work you're doing and, expanding in this podcast. And I think your supervisory role fits you, fits your gifts, and just, the impact you're having on the field that won't ever be known or measured is is huge, and that's awesome. So
I
good job.
Thanks, Monica. And like I said, I credit you because there's only 3, and you're one of them. So just know that, okay?
That means a lot.
Awesome.
That means a lot, Eric.
Let's definitely keep in touch. All right, this has been Monica
Absolutely.
Kramer, Eric Nance, Dark Side of Therapy. If you like this video, please hit like, and as always, please subscribe. Thank you so much.